Tonight we leave the soft, predictable world of electric lights and instant messages far behind. The air you breathe now is thick with coal smoke, hot oil, and the damp scent of rain on prairie grass. Your hands grip the cold, wrought iron railing of a swaying platform, not attached to a building, but to a machine, a living, fire-breathing behemoth of wood and iron. Beneath your feet, a rhythmic clack-clack-clack hammers a relentless tempo, and ahead, the locomotive stack bellows a great, woolly plume of smoke and sparks into a twilight sky so vast it curves at the edges. You are not a passenger in the comfortable sense. You are a rider on the 19th century's greatest, most dangerous network, the mail train, a rolling artery of commerce and communication stretching across the American plains. This is the Transcontinental Railroad in its raw, operational youth. And you are riding the fast mail, where the sanctity of the schedule is a religion, and the scripture is written in steam pressure and sorted postal pouches. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The chill intensifies as the sun dips, but the heat from the locomotive behind you pushes back, a competing frontier of temperature on your body. You're standing on the platform of the baggage car, the bridge between the brute force of the engine and the organized chaos of the postal clerks. The wind whips your coat, carrying with it the taste of the land, dry sage, distant rain, and the mineral tang of iron from the rails. You look back along the snaking line of cars. Behind the mail car is a solitary passenger coach, a few dim oil lamps glowing in its windows like weary eyes. Beyond that, nothing but the twin ribbons of steel, gleaming dully in the fading light, vanishing into a horizon that seems to promise everything and nothing at all. This is the great promise of the Iron Horse, the contract signed in steel between the settled East and the mythical West. It's a promise of connection, of oranges from Florida reaching Minnesota in a week, of a letter from a son in California comforting a mother in New York before her worry can fully root. But it's a promise written in fine print. To secure the massive land grants needed to build this, railroad companies weren't just given empty land. They were often granted every other square mile along the route in a checkerboard pattern. This created a bizarre, fragmented landscape of ownership that would plague the West for generations. Imagine trying to farm a mile-square plot, only to have to cross a railroad-owned desert to get to your other field. Historians still argue whether this land-grant system was a necessary evil to build a nation or one of the greatest corporate giveaways in American history, a debate that echoes in every click of the rail joints beneath us. Ahead, the locomotive lets out a long, mournful whistle, a sound that seems to get swallowed by the immense quiet of the plains only to be chased by its own echo. It's not a warning, but a statement. I am here. This is my path. You feel the train lean slightly into a gentle curve, the metal groaning in protest. In the distance, a single pinprick of light winks from what might be a homesteader's sod house, a fragile defiance against the darkness. The clerk inside the mail car behind you curses loudly as a sudden jolt scatters his sorted letters. The fireman, up ahead in the inferno's glow, hefts another shovelful of coal into the blazing maw. And you, on your cold, vibrating platform, are now a part of this machine. You are stitched into the continent. The clock is ticking, the miles are passing, and the mail, for better or worse, must go through. That mournful whistle from ahead isn't just a cry into the dark, it's a command, a demand for more. The sound is still hanging in the air when the direct consequence reaches you. A fine, gritty mist of ash and unburned coal particles, hot and smelling of sulfur, drifts back from the locomotive stack, peppering your face and coating your tongue with the taste of burnt earth. You instinctively turn away, pressing against the baggage car door, and in doing so, you get a glimpse into hell's furnace, or at least, the 19th century industrial version of it. Through the open gangway connection, you see the fireman. He's not a man so much as a moving shadow outlined in brilliant orange. The firebox door is swung wide, a portal to a sun. Inside, the coal isn't just burning, it's a molten, swirling heart of light and heat so intense it seems to warp the air around it. With a motion that's both brutal and balletic, the fireman drives his long, thin shovel into the coal pile at his feet, pivots his whole body, and hurls the black load into that brilliance. It's not a toss, it's a javelin throw of fuel. The flames roar in response, licking out greedily for a moment before he slams the heavy iron door shut with a clang that you feel in your teeth more than hear over the din. This is the brutal rhythm that powers your progress. Clack, clack, clack of the wheels, whoosh of the shovel, roar of the fire, clang of the door. Repeat. Every minute. Every hour. This is the crew's world, a sealed, screaming cathedral of heat and responsibility. You decide to move forward, stepping across the shuddering, metal-plated gangway. The noise level spikes, a cacophony of pounding pistons, rushing steam, and the grinding shriek of steel on steel. The floor here is treacherous, slick with oil and water. The heat is a physical wall, oppressive and dry, sucking the moisture from your eyes and throat in an instant. The fireman, seeing you, just nods, his face a glistening mask of soot and sweat, white lines tracing where sweat has carved paths through the grime. He doesn't try to speak. It's impossible. Instead, he gestures with his chin toward the other figure in this space, the engineer. Braced at his post by the window, one hand on the throttle lever, the other resting near the brass whistle cord, the engineer is the calm center of the storm. His eyes are fixed on the twin ribbons of track unwinding into the darkness, illuminated only by the locomotive's own headlamp, a giant parabolic reflector fueled by a blazing kerosene lamp inside, casting a frail, jittering cone of light on the rails. He's reading the road by memory and by feel, listening to the song of the wheels, sensing the tug of the grade in the muscles of the machine. He is a mainstream historical fact that lives in this very cab. The average locomotive fireman on a run like this would shovel between 2 and 3 tons of coal per hour. Not per day. Per hour. His job was to maintain a steady, blistering steam pressure, usually around 130 to 140 psi, in the massive boiler. Too little, and the train slows, missing schedules. Too much, and the boiler could explode with the force of a cannon, scattering iron shrapnel across the prairie. The pressure gauge, a trembling glass-faced dial, is his Bible, and the fireman is its frantic priest. Experienced firemen, deafened by the noise, often judge the fire's condition by the color of the light glowing through the firebox's thin spots or the damper doors. A happy fire was a bright, straw yellow. A white, glaring fire was too hot and risked burning out the grates or melting the firebox's iron walls, a catastrophe known as a crown sheet collapse, which would instantly flash the boiler's water into steam and trigger an explosion. So, he wasn't just shoveling coal, he was painting with temperature, using a palette of luminescence and instinct. Historians still argue whether the legendary case of an engineer hearing a kink in the rail, or a fireman smelling an overheated axle, was genuine sensory acuity or the romantic myth-making of a later, softer age. But in this vibrating, fiery box, you believe it. Every sense is screaming for survival. The fireman points to a tin coffee pot wedged onto a hot steam pipe. It's bubbling violently. He grins a gap-toothed smile and mimes drinking. It's a gesture of shared humanity in an inhuman environment. You shake your head, offering a thumbs up instead. The engineer, without turning, reaches up and pulls the whistle cord twice, 2 short, sharp blasts. A signal to the brakeman down the train, or maybe just a greeting to a lone coyote silhouetted on a ridge. His hand returns to the throttle, a subtle adjustment. The pounding of the driver slows just a fraction, the exhaust beats from the stack becoming more spaced, deeper. Chuff, 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 He's easing her over a slight rise he knows is coming, conserving steam. He's not just driving a train. He's dancing with it, a partner made of 40 tons of iron and ambition, and the music is the endless, demanding song of the schedule. The fireman's nod toward the rear is your dismissal. You've witnessed the heart, but the brain of this operation is in the next car. With a final, shared glance with the soot-stained god of the furnace, you retreat across the shuddering gangway, leaving the blistering roar for a different, more frantic kind of chaos. You slide open the heavy door to the railway post office car, and the world transforms. The first thing that hits you is the sound, not a mechanical roar, but a high-speed clatter. A percussion of slamming wooden pigeonhole doors, the metallic shunk of cancelling stamps, the rustle of thousands of paper sheets, and the constant, hollow rumble of the wheels beneath the floorboards. The air is thick with dust, the sharp scent of ink, and the warm, organic smell of paper and burlap. It's like stepping into a library that's been strapped to a rocket. The car is a narrow canyon of order carved from potential anarchy. On both sides, from floor to ceiling, are ranked what look like miniature wooden cabinets, the sorting cases. Each slot, or pigeonhole, is labeled with dizzying specificity: Chicago, Illinois; Omaha, Neb, business; Sacramento, Cal, general delivery; Footlami, YO, military post. 3 clerks, their shirt sleeves rolled up, vests straining, are braced against the violent sway of the car. They move with the jerky, precise grace of marionettes fighting their strings. They are not reading letters. They are processing them at a speed that seems inhuman. One clerk, a young man with ink-smudged spectacles perched on his nose, stands at a hinged table piled with a slumped, thirsty-looking mail sack. He slits it open with a brutal knife, and a cataract of envelopes spills out. His hands are a blur. He doesn't look at addresses, he glances. A flick of his wrist sends a letter spinning into a slot marked St. Louis. Another, with a foreign stamp, is deflected to a separate pile for ocean mail. His cancelling stamps as he goes, a heavy metal data in his other hand chunking relentlessly. This is the high-stakes ballet of sorting at speed, and a single mistake, a letter for Denver tossed into the Cheyenne hole, could mean a weeks-long delay, a missed business opportunity, a family left wondering. You find a spot to brace yourself against the wall, trying to be invisible. A mainstream historical fact operates here. These railway mail service clerks were the elite. They had to memorize thousands of postal routing schemes, not just cities, but counties, railway junctions, and steamboat connections. They worked on moving trains, in poor light, through curves that could send an UN-braced man flying. Their error rate was astonishingly low, often cited at less than one missorted letter per several thousand. They were paid better than most clerks, but they earned it. Carpal tunnel syndrome wasn't a modern office invention. It was called clerk's palsy back then, and these men had it in spades. Official regulations called for pens, ink, and date stamps. Unofficially, every clerk carried a finger moisten. This was a small sponge in a tin, kept damp, because licking thousands of envelopes a day would leave your tongue a shredded, paper-cut ruin. They also wielded their cancelling hammers with a specific, wrist-saving flick to avoid hammer palsy. And they developed an almost psychic sense for nixies, undeliverable mail. A smudged address, a child's scrawl, a letter simply addressed to Uncle John in the Goldfields, California. They had to make snap judgments on where to send it for further handling, or condemn it to the dead letter office. Historians still argue whether this system, for all its efficiency, created the first modern sense of data overload and workplace stress, with clerks reporting nervous exhaustion from the constant, rocking, high-concentration demand. The head clerk, an older man with a magnificent, ink-dusted mustache, barks without looking up from his sorting. Platform. Next drop in 3 minutes. Omaha pouch ready. A younger clerk scrambles to heave a now full leather pouch toward the car's side door. You watch, mesmerized. As the train doesn't even think of slowing, the clerk slides the door open. The roaring night wind whips into the car, scattering loose papers in a mini tornado. He leans out, one arm hooked around a steel bar, the heavy pouch dangling from his other hand. Ahead, a silhouette of a trackside mail crane emerges from the gloom, just a tall, angled arm. In a flash of timing that stops your heart, the clerk hooks the pouch onto the crane as we blast past. Simultaneously, he snatches an incoming pouch left hanging there for us, dragging it inside in a tangle of arms and leather. The door slams shut. The whole transaction took less than 4 seconds. No words. No stop. The mail never sleeps. The head clerk catches your awestruck expression and winces, rubbing his lower back. The through mail waits for nothing, son, he shouts over the clatter. Not for weather, not for Indians, and certainly not for supper. He nods to the letters fluttering in his hands. A man's pardon, a widow's pension, a speculator's tip on a silver mine, all of it right here, riding the rails. We're not just clerks. We're the nation's circulatory system. And right now, the pulse is racing. He turns back to his case, his hands once again becoming that blur of efficient motion, connecting a continent one flick of the wrist at a time. The slam of the mail car door seals you back into a comparative quiet. Though it's all relative, the clack 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 is now a familiar pulse in your bones. You retreat to the open platform at the rear of the baggage car, needing air that isn't thick with paper dust and urgency. You lean against the railing, the wooden slats vibrating under your forearms, and finally take in the world you're speeding through. The moon has risen, a cold, hard coin pressed against the black velvet of the sky. It washes the plains in a monochrome silver, revealing a landscape that defies your expectation of emptiness. This isn't a blank slate. It's a living, breathing entity, and your train is a noisy intruder on its nightly business. The empty plains are, in fact, a bustling ecosystem. Shadows detach themselves from the deeper gloom and resolve into small herds of pronghorn, their white rumps flashing like startled ghosts as they sprint parallel to the tracks for a thrilling, competitive moment before peeling away. A pair of coyotes, eyes glowing emerald in the locomotive's backspill, pause over some small, unfortunate creature, watching us pass with an air of cynical assessment. This is the illusion of empty space, shattered. The train isn't crossing a void, it's bisecting a kingdom. The tracks themselves are a curious, linear feature that the local inhabitants are still learning to use. You see smaller, quicker shadows, jackrabbits, probably, using the cleared right-of-way as a convenient runway. A great horned owl, disturbed from its perch on a lone telegraph pole, launches itself silently into the dark, a reminder that the wires strung alongside the tracks are already becoming part of the wildlife's architecture. A mainstream historical fact about this vastness: before the railroad, the Great Plains were often labeled on maps as the Great American Desert, a place to be crossed as quickly as possible. But the railroad didn't just cross it, it dissected it, studied it, and commodified it. Surveyors and naturalists riding these very trains documented the flora and fauna, sending back specimens that slowly changed the scientific perception of the region from a barren wasteland to a complex grassland biome. The train was a moving observatory, and every clerk, fireman, and engineer was an unwitting field researcher. This observation involves the tracks themselves as a hunting tool. Stories, often dismissed as tall tales but persistently told, claimed that wolves and coyotes learned to use the rails. The theory went that they would chase jackrabbits or even young antelope onto the tracks, where the animals, confused by the unfamiliar gravel and wooden ties, would stumble or slow down, making for an easier kill. Even more bizarre were accounts from early train crews of seeing large predators, mountain lions or bays, simply using the flat, clear rail bed as an easy path to travel, a free highway through the tangled prairie grass. Historians still argue whether this represents actual learned animal behavior or if lonesome railroad men were simply projecting a kind of cynical intelligence onto the wilderness they both feared and admired. Your own journey is not a passive sightseeing tour. The train is a moving target. A sudden, sharp thwack against the side of the car makes you jump. Then another. It's hailstones, leftover ammunition from the storm we outran hours ago, now peppering the train as we race through a pocket of lingering weather. The plains weather is its own sovereign nation, with borders that shift by the minute. One moment you're in clear moonlight, the next you're engulfed in a cold, ground-hugging mist that swallows the world beyond the railing, the whistle sounding muffled and forlorn. Then you burst out again under a canopy of stars so dense and bright they seem to hum. And the smells. They roll over you in waves as we pass invisible landmarks. The sudden, sweet perfume of flowering sage after a brief rain shower. The damp, earthy smell of a creek bottom you cross on a timber trestle, the bridge thundering beneath the wheels. The acrid, smoky scent of a recent prairie fire, a blackened stretch visible in the moonlight. This is not a single place, but 1,000 microclimates stitched together by steel. You are not watching a panorama. You are being presented with it, in fleeting, sensory slices, by a machine that is both conqueror and courier. The train doesn't care about the beauty or the danger. It has a schedule. But for you, on this open platform, it becomes clear. The rail story isn't just on the train. It's in everything the train is rushing past, a world that was full, complex, and violently alive long before the first surveyor's stake was driven, and one that is now being forced to reckon with this smoking, clattering, relentless new neighbor. The sensory parade of the plains is abruptly interrupted by a new, urgent sound from ahead. The locomotive's whistle, not its lonely cry, but a rapid, staccato series of short, sharp blasts. Hoo-hoo. 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 It's a signal, a shout of intent. Almost immediately, you feel a profound change in the rhythm beneath your feet. The exhaust beats from the stacks slow, deepen, and the relentless clack-clack elongates. A heavy, metallic groaning shudders through the entire train as the brakes take hold. You're slowing down. Fast. Ahead, a cluster of lights materializes from the darkness, not the lonely wink of a homestead, but a rude constellation of yellow flames, lanterns and torchlight. The smell of coal smoke and damp grass is overtaken by the rich, chaotic perfume of burning pine knots, hot metal, steaming horse manure, and frying pork. You've reached a division point, a frontier depot, a frantic oasis in the iron desert. The train lurches to a final, hissing stop. The sudden quiet is almost deafening, broken only by the locomotive's impatient panting, shish-clunk, and the explosive release of steam from its valves, a great, white geyser that shrouds the scene in a ghostly veil. Instantly, the night erupts into organized bedlam. Men swarm the locomotive like ants on a fallen log. Their shouts cut through the mist. Up on the jack. Get the ash pan. Water column swung over. Move, you sluggards. 20 minutes. You have 20 minutes, or the westbound will be on our heels. This is not a town for living. It's a machine for servicing machines. You step down onto the gravel, your legs wobbly from hours of vibration, and take it in. The depot itself is a low, dark shack, one window glowing. The towering wooden water tank looms beside it, a giant barrel on stilts, its spout already swinging over to jam into the locomotive's tender. But the real action is everywhere else. Hostlers are leading away the lathered, snorting team of horses that had just dragged a fresh goods wagon up to the platform. A blacksmith, his face lit by the hellish glow of his portable forge, is already hammering a red-hot piece of metal. the clang 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 a counter-rhythm to the shouts. The air is thick with curses in a dozen languages: Irish, German, Chinese from the line crews, and the universal tongue of exhausted men. A mainstream historical fact grounds this chaos. These division points were spaced roughly 100 miles apart, the distance a steam locomotive could travel before needing more water and a fresh crew. The men here worked on railroad time, which was often different from local sun time, creating a bizarre temporal bubble. Everything was measured in minutes. The station butcher would be hawking sandwiches and pies through the train windows. The news butch, a young boy with a satchel, would dart through the passenger car selling newspapers, candy, and dime novels. But for the crew, it was a brutal relay race. The fireman you just saw, sweat-soaked and trembling from hours of shoveling, stumbles past you towards the shack, seeking coffee and a 10-minute nap before he has to turn around and head back the other way on the next train. The quirky tidbit of this place involves its primary currency, information, and the need to get it fast. Before the train even fully stopped, the station agent would have been shouting up to the engineer about track conditions ahead. Wash out at milepost 76, take the siding at Bitter Creek and wait for the extra. And handing up written orders via a long hoop. But the real social hub was the depot's telegraph office. For a few minutes, this shack was the node where the nervous system of the telegraph met the muscle of the railroad. Men would crowd in, not just for official business, but to hear the latest news clicked in from across the continent: election results, baseball scores, gold strikes. It was the 19th century version of refreshing a social media feed, powered by Morse code and desperation. And then there's the smell of whiskey. It's everywhere. On the breath of the men, from the flasks in their back pockets, seeping from the rough plank saloon just beyond the circle of light. It was medicinal, fuel, and solace. Historians still argue whether the staggering rates of alcoholism among early railroad men were a cause of the job's brutal conditions or a consequence, a necessary anesthetic for a life spent in constant danger, deafening noise, and routeless travel. In this reeking, shouting, lantern-lit chaos, it feels very much like the latter. You see the head mail clerk from your car arguing fiercely with the station agent over a misdirected pouch, their faces inches apart. A brakeman is already climbing atop the cars, adjusting the manual set brakes for the next leg. The fireman emerges from the shack, his face washed but eyes hollow, and heaves himself back up into the now-serviced locomotive, where a fresh pile of coal awaits. The engineer checks his watch under a lantern, snaps it shut, and gives a sharp nod. The whistle screams one long, undeniable blast. The oasis is closing. You scramble back onto the platform as, with a massive jerk and a chorus of clanging couplings, the iron horse lurches forward, thirsty, fed, and impatient for the dark miles ahead, leaving the cursing, glowing, temporary world of the depot to recede into a shrinking island of light in the vast, hungry plains. As the depot's chaotic glow shrinks to a faint smudge in the darkness behind you, the train settles back into its running rhythm. But the brief stop has stirred the other inhabitants of this metal snake. A door ahead of you, leading from the mail car forward, opens, and a wave of different air washes out: stale perfume, the greasy scent of woolens, the faint, sweet-sour smell of packed humanity and fried chicken. Curiosity pulls you forward, away from the solitary platform, and you step through the connector into the passenger car. The contrast is jarring. After the purposeful, worm-like chaos of the mail and baggage cars, this is a scene of strained civility. The car is a long, narrow tube of varnished wooden smoke-stained ceiling, lit by a few flickering oil lamps in brass sconces. The seats are not plush chairs, but hard, wooden benches with minimal padding, arranged facing each other in pairs. And on every bench, a story is trying to sleep, read, or simply endure. This is a microcosm of American ambition, rolling at 25 miles per hour. You slide into an empty spot at the rear, taking it all in. Across from you, a family, a worn-looking woman in a bonnet trying to soothe a fussing infant, while a boy of about 6 presses his nose against the grimy window, mesmerized by his own reflection in the dark. Next to them, a man in a sharp, though dusty, suit, a drummer, or traveling salesman, has his sample case of patent medicines open on his lap, polishing a bottle of Dr. Hostetter's celebrated stomach bitters with a handkerchief. His eyes are calculating, already planning his pitch for the next town. Further down, a group of young men in rough work clothes, their faces still bearing the hopeful sheen of the recently departed, play a quiet game of cards. They are likely heading west to work on the expanding line or chase rumors of silver in Colorado. An older couple, dressed in the severe black of mourning or perhaps just plain piety, sit ramrod straight, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer, or maybe just cursing the discomfort. In the corner, a soldier in a faded blue uniform sleeps fitfully, his head lolling with the train's sway, his boots coated in a distinctive, pale dust from some distant western fort. A mainstream historical fact is embodied in this car. The railroad democratized long-distance travel, but it didn't equalize it. A ticket from Chicago to San Francisco in the 1870s could cost between $65 and $100 for a first-class Pullman Palace sleeper, which this decidedly is not. That was about 3 months' wages for a laborer. The people in this car, in the hard second-class or emigrant seats, paid maybe $40. They endured the wooden benches, the lack of sleeping accommodations, and brought their own food to save money. They were the middle and lower tiers of the Great Migration, trading brutal discomfort for the dream of a new start. To survive the multi-day journey, an etiquette evolved. The window seat was prime real estate, controlling the one source of fresh air and cinders. You didn't just take it. The strongest or pushiest often did, but social pressure could sometimes enforce a rotation. The shade, foot-warming boxes filled with heated stones at stations were a source of constant, low-grade negotiation. And then there was the seat-sleeping art. People developed elaborate, acrobatic methods to sleep on the narrow benches, using rolled coats as pillows, bracing against their neighbors, with or without permission, and even tying themselves to the luggage racks above with belts or scarves to avoid tumbling into the aisle during a lurch. Historians still argue whether this enforced proximity fostered a unique, fleeting camaraderie among strangers, or simply amplified the era's notorious distrust of other, with passengers clutching their belongings tighter every time someone new boarded. You catch the eye of the drummer. He gives you a practiced, weary smile. "Quite the menagerie, ain't it?" he says, his voice barely audible over the rumble. The hopeful, the desperate, and the just plain lost. All going somewhere they think will be better than where they've been. He gestures with his bottle of bitters. I sell 'em the cure for the journey's ailments. The railroad sells 'em the journey. Between us, we've got the whole human condition covered. He winks, a gesture that feels both cynical and strangely compassionate. A sudden jolt, the train hitting a rough section of track, sends a collective gasp and shuffle through the car. The infant wails. The card game pauses. The soldier's eyes snap open, hand flying to where his sidearm would be, before he remembers where he is and slumps back, embarrassed. In that moment, the fragile veneer of separate journeys falls away. You're all in this vibrating, dusty tube together, hurtling through a hostile darkness towards an uncertain dawn. The shared vulnerability is palpable, and for a few seconds, the car is silent except for the train's own voice. Then, as the ride smooths, the individual dramas reassert themselves. The drummer goes back to polishing. The boy goes back to the window. The wheels sing their steady, indifferent song. You've seen the nation's blood, the mail, and its muscle, the crew. Now you've seen its restless, dreaming soul, packed shoulder to shoulder on a hard wooden bench, heading west. The fragile peace of the passenger car is shattered not by human conflict, but by the sky. A flash, bone white and silent, illuminates the entire interior for a split second, freezing the drummer's smile, the infant's yawn, the soldier's weary blink in a stark, photographic negative. A heartbeat later, the sound arrives, not a rumble, but a catastrophic crack that seems to split the world in two directly above the train. The oil lamps gutter violently. Then the rain comes. It doesn't fall, it assaults. One moment, the night is clear. The next, a solid wall of water slams into the side of the car with a roar that drowns out the wheels. It's as if the train has plunged into a river. The drumming on the roof is a frantic, insane timpani. Through the window, the world vanishes into a swirling, liquid gray. The scheduled, mechanical world of the train is suddenly at war with the elemental chaos of the plains. You feel the train slow again, but this isn't the controlled deceleration for a depot. This is a cautious, fighting retreat. The whistle sounds, not with authority, but with a pleading note, huo, a warning to any unseen switchmen or trackwalkers, but mostly a cry of defiance against the storm. In the locomotive cab, you know the engineer is hunched forward, his face practically against the glass, straining to see the faint glow of the headlamp on the rails just a few feet ahead. The fireman isn't shoveling for speed, but for steady, manageable steam, knowing the brakes will be slick and the rails may soon be too. This is where the iron god of the schedule meets the indifferent fury of the prairie. A mainstream historical fact of railroading in this era, rain was a far greater danger than snow or even cold. A sudden downpour could turn the roadbed, a carefully laid bed of gravel and earth supporting the ties, into a spongy, unstable morass. Washouts were the nightmare. A creek or drainage ditch, swollen to a torrent in minutes, could scour away the earth beneath the tracks, leaving the rails dangling over a void. Trains spotting such a hazard had to stop immediately, often backing up for miles to the last station to warn others. Timetables weren't just ignored in such weather, they were rendered meaningless scrolls. But the quirky, immediate problem inside your car is more prosaic: leaks. The rain finds every flaw in the roof's construction. A steady drip lands with a plink on the drummer's sample case. He swears, covering it with his coat. Another stream finds its way down the wall near the mourning couple, who shift with affronted dignity. A child laughs, holding out a cup to catch water. The adults aren't amused. The air grows thick and damp, smelling of wet wool, damp wood, and ozone. The storm is invading, reminding everyone that this tube of civilization is terrifyingly fragile. And then, a new sensation, a sluggishness. The confident clack-clack becomes a labored squelch-thump, squelch-thump. The train is sloughing through mud, the wheels slipping. You feel it struggle, like a great beast mired in a tar pit. The forward momentum bleeds away. The engineer, fighting to keep her moving, might be sanding the rails, dropping a stream of sand from a box onto the tracks just ahead of the drive wheels for traction. It's a battle of grit against slime. Historians still argue whether the greatest test of a 19th century engineer's skill was in high-speed running or in this exact scenario. The delicate, gut-feel management of throttle, brake, and sandbox to coax a 150-ton train through a miles-long bog without stalling or breaking a coupling. Stalling here, in the blinding downpour, miles from any help, was a recipe for a long, cold, and potentially dangerous night. The soldier stands up, peering into the gray chaos outside, his military bearing reasserting itself. "Devil of a night for an ambush," he mutters, not to anyone in particular. It's a reminder that the human threats are still out there too, possibly watching this slowed, vulnerable train from some unseen shelter. The mother hugs her infant closer. The card players have stopped their game, ears tuned to the song of the wheels, willing it to remain a song and not a dying groan. For 10 tense minutes, the train drags itself through the mire. The rain begins to slacken, from a solid wall to a heavy curtain, then to a steady patter. As it does, the world outside the window slowly resolves. You see standing water everywhere, sheets of it reflecting the sudden, eerie greenish light of a break in the clouds. The ditches along the track are running like creeks. But the rails are still there. The train is still moving. The whistle blows again, a single, sharp blast, triumphant, relieved. The clack-clack regains its crispness as the wheels find solid track again. The schedule is in tatters, but the forward motion, that sacred imperative, has been preserved. The engineer, up in his storm-drenched cab, hasn't conquered the weather. He's negotiated a temporary, hard-won truce with it. The passengers let out a collective, unspoken sigh. The storm has passed over, and you are still rolling west. The schedule may be a god, but tonight, it had to bow its head to a greater, older power. The storm's passing leaves behind a world scrubbed clean and strangely loud. The clack-clack of the wheels seems sharper, the hiss of steam more pronounced against the dripping silence of the plains. But the tension from the passenger car hasn't dissipated, it has simply changed shape. The violent negotiation with the weather has reminded everyone of a more intimate, grisly truth. This machine you're trusting your life to is a collection of strained metal, boiling water, and human judgment, any part of which can fail, catastrophically and without warning. A new sound underscores this, a sound that twists in your gut before your brain processes it. From somewhere beneath your feet, a sharp, rhythmic sch-chunk joins the symphony. It's not the smooth roll of a wheel. It's the sound of something wounded. The train shudders with a new, unhealthy vibration. In the passenger car, heads lift. The card players freeze, cards suspended. The drummer's polished smile vanishes. Everyone is listening now, their bodies attuned to the language of the train like animals sensing an earthquake. This is the ever-present specter of wreck. It's not a possibility. It's a passenger that boarded back at the first station and has been riding silently with you all along. A mainstream historical fact that was as common as coal dust. Derailments and boiler explosions were frequent and horrifying. Rails, made of weaker wrought iron before the widespread adoption of steel, could develop hidden cracks or cold shunts from the stress of expansion and contraction. A wheel could fracture. An axle, overheated from a lack of lubrication, a job for the oiler who walked the trains at stops, could snap. And the boiler, that giant steel tube holding back 140 pounds of pressure per square inch, was a bomb waiting for a weakness. Poor water quality causing scale, a faulty safety valve soldered shut by a negligent engineer, a fireman letting the water level get too low. Any of these could lead to a boiler explosion that would shred the locomotive and shred anyone nearby with red-hot shrapnel and superheated steam. The screeching beneath you grows louder. The train is slowing again, but this is a pained, limping deceleration. You rise and move quickly back through the mail car, where the clerks have stopped sorting, hands braced on their cases, eyes wide. You step out onto the open platform. Ahead, you can see a brakeman has already scrambled down and is running alongside the train, lantern in hand, trying to spot the source of the scream. His light flashes on the spinning wheels of the baggage car. Then he sees it. He waves his lantern in a frantic, looping circle, the signal to stop now. With a final, shuddering groan, the train lurches to a halt. The silence that follows is profound and pregnant with dread. The only sounds are the ping of cooling metal, the hiss of steam, and the distant howl of a coyote, as if the planes themselves are commenting on the fragility of this iron intruder. The crew dismounts, voices low and urgent. You follow, your boots sinking into the soft, rain-soaked earth beside the track. The problem is visible even in the lantern light. A hot box. The bearing on one of the baggage car's axles, a simple journal box packed with lubricating wool waste or flax, has run dry from friction. It's not just hot, it's glowing a dull, cherry red. The metal housing is smoldering. The screech was the sound of metal on metal, grinding itself to destruction. Left unchecked, the axle would seize or snap, and the car would likely leave the rails, dragging its neighbors with it into a tangled heap of splintered wood and torn iron. This ever-present threat was the track detective or car watcher. At major yards and even along the line, men with no other job would stand and watch passing trains, specifically listening for that telltale screech and looking for the faint wisp of smoke or the hellish glow of a hot box in the night. They'd telegraph ahead to have the train stopped. It was a job born of gruesome experience. Less quirky and more grimly practical was the tool now being used. A long, hooked pole to yank the burning journal box off the axle, followed by a bucket of water or sand dumped onto the glowing axle end with a great, angry hiss. The smell is awful: burnt wool, scorched metal, and ozone. Historians still argue whether the staggering accident rates of early railroading, thousands of workers and passengers killed per year, were seen as an acceptable cost of progress or a silent national trauma. Was it simply the price of knitting a continent together, or did the public, and the companies, become numb to the weekly reports of frightful accidents and horrific scoldings in the newspapers? As you stand in the dark, watching the men swarm the wounded car, their shadows leaping in the lantern light, the question isn't academic. It's in the rapid beating of your own heart. This is the iron and bone reality. Progress has a taste, and right now, it's the acrid, metallic taste of fear and a smoldering axle cooling in the damp night air. The hot box, doused and defeated, leaves a scar on the night, a lingering stench of burnt metal and a crew moving with the grim, efficient haste of men who have just stared at averted disaster. Repairs are brutal and temporary. The ruined journal box is dragged clear, a spare packet of grease-soaked waste is hammered into the bearing, and the train is pronounced fit to limp to the next proper repair station. The whistle blows, a sound that now feels weary rather than commanding. The train creaks forward, the damaged wheel emitting a softer, apologetic groan with each revolution. But something has shifted. The storm, the breakdown, they've stripped away the illusion of the train as an unstoppable force. Now, as you stand once more on the rear platform, the journey feels intimate, vulnerable. The moon has climbed higher, bathing the endless grasslands in a silvery, silent flood. The train is no longer a conqueror. It is a lone comet of light and sound traversing a sleeping ocean. This is the night run. The sensory world narrows and intensifies. Sight is reduced to the small circle of WAN light from your car's lantern, the distant spark shower from the locomotive stack floating back like dying fireflies, and the infinite, star-choked blackness above. But sound becomes your primary map. The exhaust beats from the stack, chuff, 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 are slower now, a measured, somber breath. The wheels find a new song on the rain-tightened rails, a rhythmic, metallic humming. And beneath it all, the endless, sighing wind across the grasses, a constant whisper the train can never outrun. You are not alone in listening. The night is watching back. Reflective eyes gleam from the darkness just beyond the right-of-way, a curious coyote sitting on its haunches, a pair of pronghorn, their heads lifted in unison as you pass. They don't flee. They observe. The train at night is a familiar anomaly, a noisy, fiery mystery that passes and then leaves the deeper silence behind. From a distant ridge, you see the faint, orange wink of a campfire. Is it a homesteader? A hunting party from one of the plains tribes? A gang of outlaws using the railroad as their own private highway? The fire gives no answer, and the train offers no greeting, just its receding, rhythmic call. A mainstream historical fact of these night runs: They were when the railroad did its most vital, unseen work. The fast mail trains, like the one you're on, were often scheduled to run through the night to maximize speed. While cities slept, the arteries of commerce and communication pulsed. The tracks themselves were inspected by section gangs during the day, so the night was for running, a trust fall with the work of unseen laborers. It was also the time of greatest danger from train wreckers or bandits, who used the darkness as cover. The vulnerability you feel isn't just existential, it was a documented, nightly risk. The locomotive, burning wood or soft coal, would hurl a continuous meteor shower of embers into the air. These weren't just pretty, they were a major fire hazard. Line-side grass, dry as tinder, could easily ignite. Stories abound of night trains running through landscapes already ablaze from their own earlier passes, or of setting accidental fires that would burn for days. To combat this, some lines employed spark arresters, metal mesh caps over the stacks, but they cut down on draft and efficiency, and engineers hated them. So, the shower of sparks continued, a beautiful, dangerous byproduct of progress, painting fleeting orange trails on the velvet night. Historians still argue whether the railroad's spark-induced fires significantly altered the ecology of the Great Plains by preventing the natural accumulation of dry grass, or if they were just a dramatic footnote to the larger forces of climate and grazing. You lean on the railing, your face cool in the night air, your body still humming from the day's vibrations. The passenger car behind you is mostly dark now, its inhabitants surrendered to an uneasy sleep. The mail car ahead is quiet, the clerks perhaps catching a few moments of rest between sorting points. Only the engine crew, the engineer and the fireman, are fully awake, their world reduced to the glow of the firebox, the trembling needle of the pressure gauge, and the slender cone of light picking out the rails. You are between worlds, not part of the toiling crew, not part of the sleeping cargo. You are a witness to the solitude. The train's whistle sounds again, a long, low note that seems to bleed into the landscape, a call that receives no answer but the wind. It's a sound of profound loneliness, and of equal determination. The miles unwind, the stars will overhead, and the iron horse, wounded but unwavering, carries its tiny constellation of human hopes and fears through the ancient, watching dark. The lonely poetry of the night run is shattered just before dawn by a sound you haven't heard yet, the locomotive's whistle screaming in a continuous, panicked blast. Not signals, not warnings, but a raw, sustained shriek of alarm. The brakes slam on with a violence that nearly throws you from the platform. The train slews, wheels shrieking on the rails, before grinding to a shuddering halt. Ahead, the engineer leans out of his cab, pointing frantically. You follow his gaze, and your breath catches. The pre-dawn gray light reveals the prairie ahead not as grass, but as a living, shifting, brown carpet. It stretches from the tracks to the horizon in every direction, a sea of humped backs and shaggy heads, moving with a slow, deliberate, tectonic force. Bison. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. A herd of such immensity it defies logic, a single organism made of muscle and hide and hot breath that condenses in the chilly air like a low fog over the multitude. The train has met the true monarchs of the plains, and the monarchs do not yield. You climb down, joining the crew who stand silently by the tracks, their earlier urgency replaced by a kind of awestruck helplessness. The herd parts around the train as a river parts around a stone, flowing on both sides. The sound is overwhelming, a deep, constant thunder of hooves, the grunting and lowing of the beasts, the crunching of grass. The smell is primal, dust, warm fur, and the sweet, pungent odor of their dung. You watch, mesmerized, as the river of life streams past. A cow and her calf pass so close you see the intelligence in her dark, liquid eye, the calf skittering to keep up. The ground trembles. But the ore curdles quickly. As the light strengthens, you see the reason for the herd's relentless movement. On the flanks of the great herd, tiny figures on horseback dart and weave. Hunters. But these aren't plains tribesmen hunting for sustenance and utilizing every part of the animal. These are white men, hired by the railroad or working commercially. You hear the distant, flat cracks of their rifles. A great bull stumbles, then collapses, its legs folding beneath it. Then another. And another. The hunters are selective, often taking only the tongue and the hide, the most profitable parts, leaving the vast, steaming carcasses to rot on the prairie. The scale of the waste is nauseating. A mainstream, grim historical fact unfolds before you. This was deliberate policy. Railroad companies, along with the US government, actively encouraged the wholesale slaughter of the bison herds. There were two main reasons: to clear the tracks of what they saw as mobile obstacles that could cause devastating derailments. A Texas cowcatcher on the front of the engine could only handle so many. And, more insidiously, to cripple the plains tribes whose way of life was inextricably linked to the buffalo. "Kill every buffalo you can," one army officer famously said. "Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone." The trains didn't just transport hides, they enabled the slaughter, bringing hunters out and carrying the spoils back east to tanneries. For many Easterners and Europeans on their first trip west, this exact scene, the train halted by a vast herd, was a scheduled attraction, a thrilling part of the Wild West experience. They would lean out of the windows, firing their own pistols and rifles at the milling giants for sport, often missing entirely but adding to the cacophony and terror. Some railroads even advertised the chance to hunt buffalo from the train windows. It was a grotesque carnival of destruction, a turning of a sacred resource and a way of life into a moving shooting gallery. The bison, confused by the noise and the iron monster, would often mill around the stalled train, making them even easier targets. Historians still argue whether the near extinction of the bison was an inevitable consequence of industrial expansion or a conscious, genocidal strategy of conquest. Standing here, watching the deliberate, wasteful killing, the theoretical debate feels hollow. The answer is in the roar of the rifles, in the bewildered eyes of the dying animals, and in the triumphant, pragmatic smiles of the hunters who wave at the stalled train. The train itself is complicit. It is the engine of this destruction in every sense. After what feels like an eternity, the herd's main body passes, leaving behind a landscape littered with dark mounds. The hunters move among them, skinning. The engineer, his face set in a grim line, shakes his head and blows the whistle, 2 short blasts. The crew boards. The train, an alien thing in this scene of ancient life and modern death, begins to move slowly forward, picking its way through the carnage. The stench of blood and opened viscera fills the air. No one on the platform speaks. The glorious, terrifying spectacle is over, leaving only the taste of ash and the grim understanding of what your progress truly costs. The iron horse rolls on, its tracks now literally paved with the bones of the old world. The train accelerates, leaving the slaughter grounds and their clinging stench behind, but a different kind of tension wires the air. The encounter with the herd was a blunt, chaotic force of nature. What follows is a sharper, more intelligent threat. As the sun finally crests the horizon, painting the grasslands in tones of gold and rust, you see them, distant, solitary figures on horseback, silhouetted on ridgelines to the north and south. They don't approach. They don't wave. They simply watch, motionless as statues, as the train crawls through their domain. These are not the hunters. These are the hunted. The people for whom the bison were life, and for whom the iron road is an existential scar. Tensions at the crossing aren't just a possibility, they are the baseline reality now. You notice the crew has become visibly more alert. The fireman keeps his head on a swivel, glancing from his fire to the horizons. The brakemen atop the cars are looking not just down the line, but out across the plains. In the mail car, you later learn, the clerks have been instructed to keep their heavy, cast-iron sorting tables between themselves and the windows. A mainstream historical fact underpins this silent scrutiny. The Transcontinental Railroad was built across territory that was, by treaty, sovereign Native American land. The line disrupted migration routes, scared off game, and brought waves of settlers, soldiers, and disease. Conflicts were inevitable. While full-scale attacks on moving trains were rarer than popular myth suggests, they happened. More common were raids on isolated work crews, the theft of livestock from work trains, or the stripping of valuable materials like telegraph wire. The train was a rolling symbol of broken promises, and every whistle blast was a taunt. The practical reality of these encounters often revolved around the train itself as a resource. Plains tribes, masters of adaptation, learned the train's rhythms quickly. Stories persist of warriors timing their movements to the train's schedule, using its noise to cover their own, or even, in a few disputed accounts, learning to momentarily derail a slow-moving freight by placing obstructions on the rails to plunder its cargo of food, tools, or weapons. But just as often, the interactions were transactional. At designated water stops or near forts, you might see trade, fresh antelope or bison meat, from herds not yet decimated, offered for sugar, coffee, or especially for bright bolts of cloth and shiny metal goods. The relationship was a complex, painful tapestry of conflict, curiosity, and necessity. You're watching one of these distant sentinels when it happens. A flicker of movement, not from the ridge, but from a shallow gully much closer to the tracks. A single rider bursts forth, his pony at a full gallop, keeping perfect pace with the train for 100 exhilarating yards. He's young, his face painted, his hair streaming. He isn't shooting. He's racing. It's a display of sheer, defiant skill and speed. For a moment, man and machine are locked in competition. Then, with a whoop you can almost feel rather than hear over the train's noise, he peels away, vanishing back into the landscape as suddenly as he appeared. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement. We are still here. We are still fast. We see you. Historians still argue whether these fleeting, often non-violent confrontations represented a form of communication, a testing, a taunting, a measuring, or were simply the opportunistic actions of young men from warrior cultures presented with a thrilling, dangerous new toy. Was it approach-resistance, or something more nuanced? The soldier in the passenger car would have called it a scout for an ambush. The young man on the pony might have called it a game, or a prayer, or a challenge to the gods of steam and iron. The engineer responds not with a whistle, but with a subtle increase in throttle. The exhaust beats quicken. Chuff, 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 chuff. The message is clear and reciprocal. We are fast, too. And we will not stop. The silent watchers on the ridges slowly dwindle into the shimmering distance, but the feeling of being observed, of traversing a land that is not empty and is not yours, lingers long after they are gone. The encounter leaves no physical mark, but it etches a psychological one. This is not a vacant passage. This is a crossing, and you are the one being crossed, judged by ancient eyes from the high ground. The train may own the rails, but it will never own the silence between them. The silent judgment from the ridges fades with the miles, but the memory of being watched leaves a residue of unease. The train seems to carry it in its joints, a new, subtle vibration of collective nerves. It's in this atmosphere that you notice him. Back in the passenger car, where you've returned for a semblance of shelter, a man you hadn't paid much mind before now seems to be listening. He sits alone, a nondescript figure in a decent but travel-worn suit. He's been reading a newspaper for hours, but his eyes aren't scanning the columns. They're taking in the car, flicking from the dozing drummer to the card-playing laborious to the family in the corner. He doesn't startle when the train lurches. He simply adjusts his balance with a practiced, minimal movement. When the conductor comes through, he doesn't just show his ticket. He shares a quiet, knowing word, and the conductor nods, almost deferentially, before moving on. Your curiosity must be plain, because after the conductor leaves, the man folds his paper, meets your gaze, and gestures to the empty seat beside him. His voice, when he speaks, is low and even, meant only for you. See something interesting, friend? You sit. Up close, you notice details. A slight bulge under his left armpit, a weariness in his eyes that has nothing to do with lack of sleep, and hands that are clean but marked with old nicks and calluses in places a clerk or merchant wouldn't have them. He doesn't wait for your answer. Lot of valuable property on a train, he says, his eyes scanning the car again. Mail pouches with cash, bonds, stock certificates. Freight cars full of goods. Even the passengers, some carrying their whole fortune west in a money belt, attracts a certain element. He's a railroad detective. Not a sheriff or a marshal, but a company man. His jurisdiction is the right-of-way, his law is the corporate directive, and his badge is often a simple, heavy piece of brass kept in a vest pocket. A mainstream historical fact. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency and other private firms were hired en masse by railroads to combat a tidal wave of theft, fraud, and robbery. Their mandate was vast, from catching ticket forgers and pickpockets on passenger trains, to investigating embezzling station agents, to hunting the gangs that preyed on isolated freight depots or, in legendary cases, stopped whole trains. Men like this operated with wide latitude, answerable primarily to the railroad president, not local law. Right now, he continues, nodding toward the card players, I'm watching for a confidence man working the 3-card monotony emigrants. Last week, it was a gang blowing safes in baggage cars using nitro. He says it casually, as if discussing the weather. The aspect of his job was its sheer improvisation. He might pose as a wealthy cattle buyer, a drunken miner, or an itinerant preacher to blend in. He relied on a network of telegraph operators, station agents, and even sympathetic saloon girls for tips. His tools were a concealed revolver, a pair of handcuffs, and an intimate knowledge of human greed. He was part policeman, part spy, and part corporate avatar in a land where traditional law was often days away. He offers you a faint, humorless smile. Most folks think the danger's out there, he says, tilting his head toward the window and the passing planes. And some of it is. But more of it's right in here. The fellow selling shares in a non-existent silver mine. The widow with a sob story aiming to lighten a gentleman's wallet. The postal clerk with a gambling debt who thinks he can borrow from a registered mail sack. His job was to maintain the fragile integrity of the system from within, to ensure that the trust required for a continent-spanning enterprise wasn't undermined by the very people it employed or carried. Historians still argue whether these private police forces represented a necessary step in bringing order to a lawless frontier or were essentially corporate mercenaries who often acted above the law, intimidating laborers, breaking strikes, and enforcing the railroads were with a brutality that elected sheriffs could not. Sitting beside this quiet, observant man, you feel both safer and more unsettled. His authority is absolute, yet invisible, his justice, swift and not necessarily public. He sees you looking at his concealed weapon. It's a quiet post today, thankfully, he says, standing as the train begins another gradual slowdown for a water stop. But the line is long, and the opportunities for sin are endless. Remember, friend, he adds, fixing you with a final, flat stare. On the railroad, you're either part of the traffic, part of the crew, or part of the problem. He tips his hat, a perfectly ordinary gesture that now feels like a warning, and melts into the crowd of passengers disembarking to stretch their legs. Just another anonymous traveler, watching, always watching, law on the lone prairie. The detective's warning hangs in the air like gun smoke, a reminder that the social order on this train is as carefully constructed and as fragile as its mechanical order. As the train takes on water at the lonely stop, a place called Whiskey Gap, according to a sun-bleached sign, you stay aboard, watching the detective work the crowd with invisible purpose. But your attention is pulled away by a sound that has become the background static of the journey, but now takes center stage. The rapid, metallic click-click-clickety-click coming from the tiny station shack. You step down and move toward it, drawn by the sound. Inside, lit by a single kerosene lamp, the station agent, a man with a green eye shade and ink-stained fingers, is hunched over a telegraph key. His hand dances, tapping out a staccato rhythm. On the other side of his small desk, a tape of paper chatters out of a register, spewing a continuous strip of dots and dashes. He doesn't look up as you enter, the message is flowing through him. He is a human switch in a nervous system made of copper wire and lightning. This is the true mind of the railroad, far ahead of the train itself. Those telegraph wires, strung on a procession of lonely poles that have been your constant companion, are humming with our future. The agent finishes sending, his hand falling still with a final, decisive click. He immediately rips the still chattering paper tape from the register, his eyes scanning the code as naturally as if it were print. He grunts, grabs a pre-printed form, and begins scribbling a translation. For your engineer, he mutters, not to you, but to the universe. Extra freight westbound. His to take the siding at Cully Junction and wait. Meets the eastbound passenger special at 10:47. He blows on the ink, folds the paper, and slots it into a leather pouch attached to a hoop. As the locomotive's whistle blasts the ready-to-depart signal, he's already out the door, handing the hoop up to the waiting engineer. Our entire next several hours have just been dictated by that chattering strip of paper. A mainstream historical fact, the telegraph and the railroad were symbiotic twins, born together and utterly interdependent. The telegraph allowed for centralized dispatching, preventing head-on collisions on single tracks, a horrifically common early disaster. It sent price reports for cattle and grain, turning local markets into a national one. It carried private messages for passengers and commercial orders for businesses at the next stop. The train moved the physical goods and people. The telegraph moved the information that made their movement purposeful. Without the telegraph, the fast mail and precise scheduling would be impossible. It was the first form of real-time, long-distance communication, and the railroad was its physical embodiment. The quirky side of this system was the telegraph operators themselves, especially the lonely ones at remote junctions like this. They were often young men, and their isolation bred a unique, wire-bound culture. They developed friendships and rivalries with operators they'd never met hundreds of miles away, recognizing each other by their fist, their unique tapping rhythm. They played chess by telegraph, shared news, even flirted. The wires carried not just official business, but the gossip, loneliness, and humor of the men who manned the continental nervous system. An operator might signal a friend down the line, tramp sleeping behind station. Wake him with coal shovel when number 7 passes, turning a mundane duty into a shade, wire-borne joke. Back on the moving train, the reality of that telegraphic command unfolds. The engineer, his new orders in hand, checks his watch and makes a small adjustment to the throttle. We are now running not just against the clock, but in a delicate, timed dance with another train we cannot yet see. Historians still argue whether the telegraph's greatest impact was on commerce and safety, or on the human perception of time and space itself. For the first time in history, a message could outpace a human, and a man in Omaha could know what a man in Sacramento was thinking almost instantly. Did this foreshortening of distance create the modern sense of an interconnected nation, or did it simply make the wait for the physical reality, the train carrying the promised goods or the longed-for person, feel even more agonizing? You feel that new tension in the engineer's posture. He's no longer just racing the sun, he's slotting into an invisible, nationwide grid of moving parts. The click of the key has translated into the precise pressure of his hand on the throttle, the exact moment he'll start braking for the siding. The train is no longer just a thing of iron and fire. It is now a data point, a moving node in a vast, intelligent network, its path cleared by whispers of electricity racing ahead along silent wires, guiding you forward through the gathering day. The dance dictated by the telegraph is executed with flawless, tense precision. You feel the train slow, then veer onto a siding, a parallel set of tracks, where you wait for 10 endless minutes as a massive, eastbound freight thunders past, its cars loaded with Oregon timber and Washington wheat. Once it passes, you are back on the main line, accelerating. But the landscape outside your window is no longer the same. The change is subtle at first. The endless, unbroken sea of grass begins to show scars. Fences appear, not the neat lines of settled farms, but rough-hewn affairs of crooked posts and wire, boxing off squares of land that look barely different from the wilderness around them. Then you see the claims, a sod hut dug into a hillside, smoke curling from a stovepipe, a ragged canvas tent flapping beside a half-dug well, a wagon, stripped of its wheels, serving as a permanent shelter. These are the tentacles of commerce and settlement, reaching out from the railroad like thirsty roots. The train's whistle, which for so long has been a cry into the void, now has an audience. People stop their digging or their washing and watch you pass. A child waves frantically from a doorway. A man leading a mule simply stares, his face unreadable. You are no longer just crossing a land, you are passing through its colonization in real time. The railroad isn't just a train, it's the reason these people are here. It's the thin, steel thread connecting their desperate gamble to the markets of Chicago and New York. A mainstream historical fact manifests in these crude homesteads. The federal government granted the railroads enormous parcels of land to sell to settlers, in order to finance construction. The railroads became the biggest real estate companies in the world. They published pamphlets in multiple languages, extolling the fertility of the rain follows the plow plains, and offered cheap fares for settlers. These people you're waving at bought their land from the railroad, shipped their belongings on the railroad, and their survival now depends on the railroad to ship their first harvest back east. Their fate is literally tied to the tracks. If the railroad raises freight rates, they starve. If a blizzard stops the trains, they freeze. The train is their lifeline, and their jailer. The immediate evidence of this new reality is in the debris along the tracks. It's no longer just natural detritus. You see the bleached bones of cattle that didn't survive the first winter. A broken plow, rusting in a furrow. The splintered remains of a crate that once held a family-sized stove, shipped from St. Louis. There are also new, purposeful structures. A small, windowless shack with a sign reading UPR Section House Number 47, home to the gang of immigrant laborers, often Irish or Chinese, responsible for maintaining this exact 10-mile stretch of track. Their presence is a declaration. This line is not a passing trail, it is a permanent, maintained artery. And the towns, or what will become towns. Every few dozen miles now, the landscape offers a cluster of raw, new buildings around a water tank and a depot. They have names like Promontory, Julesburg, Cheyenne, places born from the railroad's need for fuel and water, now sprouting general stores, saloons, and land offices. As you slow for one such stop, you see the chaotic energy. New arrivals disembark with all their worldly goods, looking dazed. Drummers leap off, sample cases in hand, heading straight for the saloon to find customers. The air smells of sawdust, fresh paint, and the inevitable whiskey. The train isn't just passing through these places, it is excreting them, leaving behind knots of human ambition at regular intervals along its steel spine. Historians still argue whether this pattern of settlement, linear, dictated by railroad stations every few miles, created the uniquely dispersed, town-centered geography of the American West, or if it was a wasteful, artificial imposition on a landscape that favored a different kind of habitation. Was the town every 10 miles model progress, or a corporate scheme to maximize land sales at the expense of sustainable community? The answer is in the hopeful, desperate faces watching your train pass, betting their lives on the promise sold to them by the same company that now charges them to ship their grain. The train pulls away from the latest raw settlement, its whistle giving a proprietary blast. You look back at the shrinking cluster of buildings, a single street of false-fronted frames in an ocean of grass. It looks desperately small. But the tracks, those two unwavering lines, connected to 1,000 other desperate small places, and from there, to the entire world. The frontier is no longer a place you go to. It's a place you pass through, on scheduled, daily intervals. The wilderness is being quartered, not by conquering armies, but by timetables and land deeds. And your train, pounding westward, is the needle stitching it all into a new, uncertain pattern. The scars of settlement thicken, the raw claims giving way to fields where the tough sod has been turned, revealing the dark, rich earth beneath. The fences grow straighter, the houses more substantial, though many are still built of the very sod they displaced. The immense, swallowing silence of the deep plains is gone, replaced by a patchwork of human industry. And then, as the afternoon sun begins to soften, you see it on the horizon, a smudge of smoke that is not from a locomotive, but from 100 chimneys. Then the glint of sunlight on glass windows, not just one or two, but a shimmering array. A city. The end of the line. The train's pace doesn't slacken. If anything, it seems to quicken, as if the machine itself smells home, rest, and reward. The whistle blows constantly now, not a lonely cry, but a proud, repetitive announcement. We are here. We have come. You pass through the outskirts, stockyards reeking of cattle and disinfectant, lumberyards with mountains of fresh-sawn pine, factories belching their own, darker smoke. The tracks multiply, branching and converging in a complex, steel ganglia. You rattle past standing trains on sidings, their crews waving. The sense of isolation, of being a lone comet in the dark, evaporates completely. You are now a single cell entering the bustling circulatory system of a major terminus. With a final, screeching protest of brakes and the hiss of released steam, your train glides to a halt under the vast, echoing roof of the Union Pacific Depot. The noise is staggering, a cathedral of sound built from shouting draymen, the bell-like calls of newsboys, the clatter of wagons on cobblestones outside, the echoing arrivals and departures of other trains. The journey, which felt so epic and self-contained, ends not with a whisper, but in a riotous, sooty crescendo. You step down onto the platform, your legs unsteady on solid, unmoving ground. The crew peels away, their duty done. The fireman staggers toward the boarding house, hollow-eyed. The engineer, after a final, loving pat on the side of his locomotive, heads to the office to file his report. The mail clerks are already hurling their sorted pouches onto waiting carts, where they will be rushed to the local post office, their cross-continental relay continuing without a second's pause. The passengers spill out, blinking in the dim light of the station, embraced by waiting family, or standing alone, overwhelmed by the sudden stop of motion and purpose. A mainstream historical fact is embodied in this chaotic scene. The railroad terminus didn't just receive trains, it created urban ecosystems. Towns like Omaha, Cheyenne, and Sacramento exploded from hamlets into major cities almost overnight because they were where the rails ended and the goods, people, and money transferred to other forms of transport: riverboats, wagons, stagecoaches. The depot was the engine of the city, surrounded by hotels for stranded travelers, warehouses for goods, banks for railroad payroll and land sale revenue, and 100 other supporting industries. The train didn't just connect places, it literally built them at its endpoints. As you stand there, feeling the strange, solid silence of non-movement in your bones, you understand the deeper transformation. The personal truth of the journey's end is the disorientation it brings. After days of having your world defined by the rhythm of the wheels and the narrow horizons of the train, the sudden expanse of the station, the crush of people, the sheer staticness of it all is jarring. Your body still hums, expecting the next lurch, the next curve. Your ears still listen for the familiar language of the rails beneath the human din. You have been unshackled from the train, but the train has not yet been unshackled from you. Historians still argue whether the greatest impact of the transcontinental railroad was economic or psychological. Yes, it moved goods and people cheaply and quickly. But more profoundly, it shrank a continent in the human mind. A journey that once took 6 months by wagon, with mortal danger a constant companion, now took less than a week. Time and distance, the ancient tyrants of human endeavor, had been muted by steam and steel. The frontier was no longer a distant, mythical land. It was a place you could buy a ticket to. The nation's sense of its own possibility inflated overnight. You walk out of the depot into the bustling street. The air smells of horses, coal smoke, and baking bread, the smells of a permanent, teeming world. You look back at the great, soot-stained train, already being serviced by a new crew, being loaded with mail and goods for the eastbound run. It is no longer your world. It is just a machine again, being prepared for its next iteration of the cycle. But you are different. You have crossed a continent not as a pioneer, but as a component, a piece of moving mail in the great American system. The machine has delivered you, and in doing so, it has delivered a new understanding. The vast, wild, terrifying, and beautiful plains are now a place to be traversed, not just survived. The map has been folded by iron, and you have been tucked inside its crease. The platform empties. The shouts fade. The great locomotive, its fire-banked, rests in its berth, a weary dragon. Inside the vast station, the last echoes of your train's arrival are swallowed by the cavernous space, replaced by the murmur of waiting for the next departure, the next connection, the next story to begin its roll across the miles. And you, finally still, can feel the true depth of the silence you've earned. It's not the silence of emptiness, but the rich, full silence that comes after a great noise has passed through. The clatter of the wheels, the shriek of the whistle, the groan of the couplings, they soften now, not into memory, but into a kind of music held deep in your bones, a rhythm that will echo in your dreams as a distant, comforting hum. Think of those thousands of miles, no longer an impassable gulf, but a narrative written in steel and steam. Think of the letters delivered, the families reunited, the fortunes launched, and yes, the ancient ways forever altered, all thrumming along those two parallel lines. The wilderness was met, not with a shout, but with the relentless, patient, chuffing breath of industry, and a continent was persuaded to whisper its secrets to the rhythm of the rails. So let that rhythm slow now, like the slowing beats of a great, mechanical heart settling into rest. Let the images blur and soften, the fireman's glowing face, the clerk's flying hands, the endless, star-strewn plains flowing past like a silent river. They are all safe now, held in the gentle cradle of the past. The journey is done. The track ends here, at the edge of sleep, where the only whistle is the slow, steady sigh of your own breath, and the only light is the soft, familiar dark behind your closed eyes. The world is vast, but for tonight, it is small and quiet and still.